what we could say about medieval streets of the Old Town is that we are very lucky not to be here in Middle Ages. So sometimes you can see these deep cuts in the sandstone. Yum yum. But if I would have a sip of it, I would be hammered. So we continue. Hi everyone, this is me, Valery, and today I'm gonna take you on a tour of Prague's medieval Old Town. As you can see, it does not look medieval just yet, but that's because we're standing where the medieval fortifications used to be. So Prague's Old Town got its first fortifications in 1230, and it was not just the walls, which were around 10 meters high and 2 meters wide. It was also a moat. This moat was 6 meters deep and it was occasionally filled up with water. By occasionally, I mean after a heavy rain or a big flood would come. But unfortunately, after already 100 years of the fortifications' existence, they lost its significance because Prague expanded into the new town. This is the area that you can see right behind me. And the new town had its own more advanced fortification, and it also worked as a buffer zone around the old town. So the walls started to dilapidate and the moat became a cesspit. Also, moat was a big problem for Prague traffic. It caused a lot of road accidents with carts pulled by horses. Horses were slipping and falling into the 6-meter deep moat. Nowadays, the only thing that reminds us of this moat is the name of the street, Na Přikope, which means on the moat. Another old name that reminds us of the past is Můstek. Můstek means bridge, and that's named after an old bridge that was preserved from the 13th century. And that was the bridge people would cross when they went into the old town. So we are gonna do that now as well. Let's go. If you would like to take a look at the old bridge, you can find it in the metro vestibule over here. Here you go, guys. I think it's really cool that they decided to make it part of the metro line. You can see the arches of the bridge. So now when we are going to be walking down the street, we are going to be essentially crossing it because we are going to be walking above it. Okay, this way. It is very early and Praguers are going to work. There are not so many tourists just yet. So now we are officially in the old town, and I wanted to show you guys more defense structures in disguise. One is wrapped in the scaffolding over there. It is called the House of the Blue Rose, and that taller part of the building, that actually was a Gothic tower. There were many defense towers back in Middle Ages here. Unfortunately, not many of them survived. Probably the most famous one is the Powder Tower, but it was actually constructed much later, like 200 years after the fortification walls were done. And there were also gates into the old town. So one gate used to be right here where we crossed the street. Gates were considered to be holy places in the medieval Prague. For example, people were not allowed to argue inside of the gate. That was forbidden. So if somebody wanted to have a verbal or physical altercation, they had to do it on a street and leave the gate. Sorry. There's a lot of traffic because as it's very early in the morning, the deliveries are happening. Gates were closed for the night or, for example, during the times of wars and epidemics. And if somebody was caught trying to climb over, they were punished immediately because an honest person would not climb the wall. They would just walk through the gate. Obviously, you had to pay to enter the old town. There was a special tax, kind of like a city tax. Nowadays, they are collected by the hotels you're staying in. And another building that I wanted to point out here is this one. I know it doesn't look medieval as well, but there is actually part of the defense structure from the 13th century that is preserved inside of this building. And it had an administrative purpose. It was called Richter. Richter came from a German word, Erbgericht. That was a feudal court, essentially. And they also had a prison and a torture chamber inside. So, for example, one of the most famous Czech saints, Saint John of Nepomuk, you might know him if you've been to the Charles Bridge, because his statue on the Charles Bridge is touched by a lot of people, so that's this man. He was tortured inside of this building. Nowadays, they have the Prague City Tourism Information Center there. Okay, let's continue this way. All right, we've arrived to our next stop. Sorry guys, we had to move away from the street vacuum cleaner, whatever you call that. But we are now at our next stop, and it's Havel's Market. And as you can tell by the sign behind me, it is one of the oldest, actually the oldest still functioning market in Prague. It dates back to 1232. And originally it was fruits and vegetables market. Nowadays it's more of a souvenir market, but they do have some groceries there as well, as we will see later. But let's go explore this way. They're just setting up. They opened around 1 hour ago at 7 a.m. Should be around 8 a.m. right now. Not so many people. But let's talk about markets a little bit more, because there are many in Prague. Sorry, there's a puddle. Fortunately, the cameraman has very long legs and he doesn't have to jump over it. We can stop somewhere here so we're not disturbing anyone. Right, very pretty, with a church of Saint Gall behind me. So what about Prague's markets? There were many, almost on every big square and long street. People had special rules set up for every market's occasion. And rule number 1 was don't argue. Yeah, you heard me right. People were not allowed to argue, both sellers and customers. Sellers, of course, had more rules that applied to them. For example, they were not allowed to disparage the other sellers or steal their customers or mark up the prices for their goods or sell low-quality products. There was the whole kind of quality control even back then, managed by the city. But there were some dishonest sellers, of course, and they were cheating their customers. For example, they could adjust their weight, so to sell less of a product than the customer paid for. Also, they could adjust their measuring tapes if they were selling fabrics. If they were selling spices, they could easily swap salt for limestone dust, or pepper for really roasted breadcrumbs, and even butter for lard. So that was not nice. So what would happen to a dishonest seller if, let's say, they were caught cheating? There were many punishments. The most common one was putting a seller on a pole. Sometimes they were also stripped naked and covered with honey, so insects are attracted to them. And they had to be there on that pole for 1 whole day. If they were caught cheating twice, that punishment would be extended to 2 days. If it was 3 times, 3 days, and that went even up to 5 days. But after that, there was not much to do rather than kick out the dishonest seller from the city, or sometimes even cut their hand off. But that was less common, I believe. Criminals who were punished the most were called sack cutters. Do you guys know what it means, sack cutter? Pickpockets, of course. Those could be taken straight to gallows from the marketplace. So many marionettes. Some of them are very creepy. Like this one, for example. Or this one. I will haunt you. I will haunt you in your dreams. Ha 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 ha. If you guys have not seen a cartoon, Little Mole or Kartaček, it's very popular. It's a Czech cartoon from the 50s, and it is very psychedelic. You don't have to actually speak Czech to watch it, because the mole just makes cute noises, and all the other animals, like characters, they just go like. So yeah, anyone can watch it. When it comes to the oldest drink, alcoholic at least, that was popular here, it's this one, honey wine or mead, I think you call it. So you can find some of it here. If you guys have not tried it, it's very sweet. You can also drink it warm. Yum yum. But if I would have a sip of it, I would be hammered. So we continue. The whole area around this market is one of the original ones that was established in the old town. So the houses here even have the original Gothic archways. Take a look, we can come closer. Looks like they're about to do a renovation, which means we can look at the old stone before they fix it. See these? This is where the soldiers would sharpen their weapons. So sometimes you can see these deep cuts in the sandstone. I'm presuming that's sandstone. And here you can see the vaulting system, the old Gothic vaulting system. Huh? So cool. We will go this way. There's some old portal here. Yeah, that's cool that they preserved it. You can see more Gothic arches here. They're not really visible from the street, but when you're walking inside here, you can see them. And there is also this point where all the vaulting arches meet, and that's called Svorník in Czech. I was not able to find an English translation into Svorník, but it's basically like the closing point of all the arches. All right. So actually this whole area used to have marketplaces, but we can only see one market here nowadays, and that's Havel's Market. Very pretty in the morning. But I wanted to show you guys another place, which is right on the opposite side of these buildings. And I feel like it's often overlooked. Okay, we are here, v Kotcích. You can see the name of the street there. But it's not just an empty street. Actually, used to be a shopping mall, but a medieval one. This is how it looked like. You had two sides of the shopping rows that were roofed, so you could go there even when the weather was bad, which was very convenient. And they had two rows of shopping stalls on the opposite sides, so there were around 100 shops altogether. And the street on the opposite side that also had the market, as well as this square. So now let's go to the square.
Wherever we go,
There's a lot of traffic, but this street, we already crossed it when we entered the old town. This was also the street with a lot of markets, and they were selling cheap food there. For example, it was peas with lard, it was roasted pork, it was pies, coffee, soup with noodles, and potatoes. Potatoes were not here in the Middle Ages, they got here a little bit later, and originally people were confused by them. They did not know that you were supposed to eat the bottom part of the potato. They were cooking the greens, and later they nicknamed potatoes soil apples. Pretty cool. Anyways, let's go to the square over here. A very pretty fountain here. Let's take a look. It is named after Jakub Wimmer. Jakub Wimmer was a war profiteer, but he also established public spaces, for example, Letna Garden. And this fountain is the allegory of the wine making and fruit growing, and on the top you can see a swan spurting out the water. We are now at the coal market square. So you can guess what they were selling here, right? Coal, but also flowers. Flowers, however, did not just have a decorative purpose, they also had a practical one, but I will mention it later. The coal market square saw many tragic events as well, but we've talked about them at length in 2 other videos that we did. I will link them down below, but to make a long story short, this was a place where ladies and gentlemen of the night were selling their services. And the restaurant over there, let's come a little bit closer. And this restaurant, Udvou Koček, at 2 Cats, witnessed one of the most horrific murders in Prague history. If you want to know more about it, we will leave the link to this video down below. But now let's go a little bit closer towards there. Let's go. The last thing I wanted to show you guys at the coal market square is this house. It's called House at the 3 Golden Lions, and you can see a familiar face and name there, right? Mozart. Mozart lived here during his many work trips to Prague. When he stayed here, his librettista, which means a person who writes lyrics to your operas, stayed here in Platis. So they would just talk through the open windows without leaving the houses, just across the street, casually chatting. We're gonna go to our next stop, which is just around the corner. Let's go. Okay, we are here at one of the oldest churches in Prague, the little hidden gem of our today's video. This church is called the Church of Saint Martin in the Wall. To be more specific, it's Saint Martin in the defense wall. Because this church was once upon a time kind of split, and one half of it was in the old town and another one behind the defense walls. This church dates back to 12th century. That's, just for the reference, is the time of the Second Crusade and right before Magna Carta. So it's a very old building. And you can also see the tower that was added later, I believe, during the Gothic period. Of course, there were many renovations. I wanted to tell you guys a little story connected to this church, because on the opposite side there is a memorial plaque to Brokov family. Brokovs were a famous sculptor family. If you go to Charles Bridge, you can find many of their statues there. They're one of the most beautiful ones, in my opinion. And they lived right here, and later I believe they were even buried in the graveyard of this church. And yes, we are essentially walking around it, because every church in the old town had a graveyard until they cancelled them in 18th century. So Brokov's family used to live nearby, and their neighbors hated them. And I mean hated them, they even brought them to court. But why? Because they were making a lot of noise. Their sculptor's workshop was working from 4 a.m. till late at night, and the sound of chisel on the stone was deafening. So their neighbors even filed a complaint and brought them to court, and Brokovs lost, and they had to move out to a different part of Prague and bother other people elsewhere. it is. I brought you here because this was one of the most popular routes through the city of Prague. It led from here to Vyšehrad, and originally the road was very wide. It was used by the carts that were delivering the goods and people, so it was very, very busy, and traffic was a point of contempt for Praguers. Even in the Middle Ages, they were complaining about it, and all the way till now, which now I believe it's even worse. Corners of the buildings had to be protected from being hit by the carts and wagons, and what would protect them were these. This is called bollard. And this one, which has a mascaron, so kind of like a face that is showing you his tongue, he is around 600 years old, this bad boy. And he's still here. As you can see, he did not protect the plaster of the building on top, but I don't think it's his fault. So now we will finally take a look at the narrow, winding streets of the old town. And I can tell you guys why it is so easy to get lost here. Because back in the day, when Old Town was just being established, it wasn't even a town yet, it didn't have a defense wall. Whoever was building their houses here did not have a plan, so they kind of just built them randomly wherever they liked. That led to this web of narrow streets spreading even further, but it actually had a one... Sorry, there's a delivery truck. All right. But narrow streets actually had one practical purpose. In the case of attack, they could be easily blocked and barricaded, so people could find shelter here. So now we are kind of at the fork of two streets. We're gonna take it this way, but before that, I wanted to show you this house. Doesn't look like it, but it's very old. They have Romanesque cellars. The house was later rebuilt in 17th century as a ball game house, literally a house where they would play games. That's why there is a house sign on it with bats and balls. All right, now let's go further this way. We are now on Jilska Street. This is a very typical medieval street. Well, it's very narrow. I already told you why that was important. And what we could say about medieval streets of the Old Town is that we are very lucky not to be here in Middle Ages. Why? We wouldn't be able to handle it, guys, because of the stench of the streets. One of the travelers described it as something that would stop an Ottoman expansion. That's how bad it smelled here. Why did it smell so bad though? That was not just because people were pouring trash and dirty water on a street just in front of their house. It was also because of animals, because they kept their animals just outside here in the Old Town. So if you would walk down the street, you would be surrounded by chickens, pigs, goats, horses, and even cows. And of course dogs. There were many dogs. And also what was kind of bad, that if an animal would die on the street, they would not clean the corpse away. They would just let it rot. So that obviously was a really bad smell. And remember I mentioned that people bought flowers at the coal market. One of the purposes of the flowers was to make their houses smell nice. So yes, outside on the street it smelled really bad, but people would decorate their house with flowers in order to get rid of the bad smell that was coming from the windows. By the way, the windows were usually not glassed, so there was just a cage or a thin paper that was covering the window. But to be honest, I don't think that bringing flowers inside of their houses would work with getting rid of the smell. I think it was like putting a band-aid on a shotgun wound. Didn't do much. And the Prague authorities Prague authorities tried to kind of combat this bad image of Prague. It was actually at some point considered to be one of the worst cities in terms of hygiene, but usually rules that they passed were ignored. For example, people were asked to clean just in front of their houses, but nobody was doing that. One thing that helped a lot, I think, was the cobblestones. They would place the bigger stones into the sand, and they would have a ram walk on top of them to pack up the loose stones. Which I think actually, if knowing that they had cows and horses just outside, they would have worked just fine as well. Anyways, we'll continue down this way. We are now leaving the quiet streets of the Old Town and joining the hordes which are marching to the Old Town Square. Let's go. Every time I'm here, I notice that the street has gotten more obnoxious. Actually, maybe we'll have one little stop over there. Let's take a look. Okay, it's a little quiet courtyard. We have mentioned it in one other video we made, but I thought I could do it in this one as well. If you take a look on the ground, you will notice that there is a difference between the stones here and the stones on the street, right? They're two different ones. These ones are made of wood, and that was placed here to muffle out the noise that the horses would create when the carriage would go through the passage. So nobody who lives in the house was bothered by the noise. Obviously nowadays we don't care much for that, but that's how it was in the olden times. Okay, let's go. Okay, not this way. I did not want to disturb a man over there. Ah, lovely. Okay, well, everything is wrapped in scaffolding, but what I wanted to show you guys was this thing in the middle. Okay, can you see the square behind me? Great. So we are now at Malé náměstí, which means little square, or in the past it was also called a small market because it neighbors the big market, which is all the way this way, the Old Town Square. And in the middle of the little square, we have a well/fountain. Nowadays we can't drink from it, but we can at least have a look. This is the oldest surviving well and fountain. It's 12 meters deep, and in the past people would come here to pump water and also gossip. We also have a lot of beautiful houses on this square. The ones that are on the reconstruction are also nice, but we can't see them much. And what I wanted to say about the houses is that nowadays people complain a lot about the cost of properties in Prague, that mortgages are getting ridiculous. But what if I told you that it was much worse in the Middle Ages? All because of one thing that was called forever loan. So let's say you were a relatively rich person in the Middle Ages and you wanted to build a house in the old town, but you didn't have enough of money. There were no banks back then, so you had to borrow money from your rich neighbor. But even after you paid that money off, you still had to pay them every year 1/20th of the sum of money that you borrowed originally forever. So even your family who would live in a house after you, your descendants, and people who would buy the house later, they still had to pay 1/20th of the original sum of money that was borrowed for the construction of the house. And that went on well into the 15th century, up until one Czech king cancelled this forever loan. He probably wanted to build his own house in the old town, and he looked at the law and he was like, sheesh, I cannot afford that, so I better write a new law. So it was fortunately cancelled because 90% of the houses in the Middle Ages were built under this forever loan here. Okay, let's have a look at the last stop of our today's tour, and that will be Old Town Square. Let's go. You can now see the Old Town Square behind me. It is very busy. It is after 10 a.m. This is how busy it gets here, usually. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to invite you guys to our tours that we do daily, on which you can learn about the rest of the Old Town that we haven't shown you in our today's video, as well as other places like Prague Castle, for example. Okay, thank you guys for watching. We hope that you enjoyed our tour, and if you would like to tip your guide, you can use super thanks on YouTube. If you like this format, we can do more videos like that for you. Just leave us a comment down below with a thumbs up, or just say whatever you liked about this video, and we will see you guys in our next one. Bye! And we now have to elbow through the crowd home.